All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm super excited. Thanks, Chuck, about leadership is language. It's been a lot of work while I've been flying around and talking to you guys. I've been trying to work on this sitting in an airplane seat, so it's been a bit of a struggle. By the way, don't do that if you ever want to write a book. It's not a good way of doing it. And what I'm going to do is take about 25 minutes today. I want to talk about the motivation behind the book, the structure of the book, and what I think the book's going to achieve for you. So what was happening is as we were traveling around and talking about language, and as you know, one of the things that we focused on Santa Fe was some tweaks to the language. So I have sort of this natural inclination to look at the words very carefully. And we started coming up with these little hacks, and we start doing them in meetings or in workshops with our clients. And so for example, I talk about don't ask binary questions. Start the question with the word how instead of are you sure, but how sure are you? And then I'd say any questions, binary. And then someone would say, no, I'm sorry. What are your questions? And then someone would raise their hand. Did you think about blah, 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 binary question? And it was just striking me over and over and over again how strong our programming was and how hard it was to change from how we'd been programmed. That was the way I thought about it. So we started collecting all these don't say this, say that kind of phrases. But I realized a randomized list of don't say this, say that without any structure was going to be impossible for anyone to remember and put any coherence behind. So we started looking at, well, what's the deeper structure? And that's what I want to talk about. So what I think the magic of the book is a couple things. It's very tactical in the sense of what it sounds like and the phrases that you're going to want to say and not say, but also it has a structure which I think will help anchor your thinking in terms of why these different phrases work. So I'm going to go through the three structures, basically starting from large to small. The biggest structure is this idea that when we're at work or in life, really, we use our brains in two fundamentally different ways. And sometimes we want to be focused, and this tends to be a focus. Sometimes it's physical, typically individual effort. It's a focus on doing and getting stuff done. This is typically the actual work. This is the operating team conducting the operation. This is the flight crew flying the airplane. This is the operators at the nuclear power plant running the plant. The other kind of work is a sort of a head up, expansive, wide perspective thinking. And so we're labeling these two as, just roughly speaking, this is deciding and thinking, and this is doing kind of work. And so if you look at this picture of this industrial revolution, industrial age factory, you see the difference. There's a foreman at this end, that's the thinker, and then the rest of the people are doers. And so the industrial age solution to this problem was to divide the work by group. And we had a leadership group or a management group do the deciding and a working class do the doing. And we labeled them white collar, blue collar, leaders and followers, whatever it happens to be. And then we would typically wear different colored clothes so we could tell the difference. Now it turns out that humans were not particularly good at the kind of repetitive, focused doing tasks that the Industrial Revolution was asking them to do. Machines are good at it, but humans weren't. And so the next pattern, this pattern, the overall pattern is a pattern between expansive thinking, where we want to embrace variability, and then focused doing, where we want to reduce variability. And you need to know which of these two things I'm doing, because you don't want to bring a reduced variability playbook and a reduced variability language to an embrace variability sport. So if the meeting is being run to get ideas, speaking first or even discussing it first before you vote has the effect of reducing variability. And we inadvertently sub-optimize the team's thinking. Pattern number 2 was we started thinking in terms of a series of plays. We could group these actions. Now, the number one play from the Industrial Revolution was obey the clock. That's why we have words like clockwork, we clock in, we pay people by the hour. These are all industrial age legacies, which come from this concept of obey the clock. And anything that pauses the clock is to be avoided. And so we came up with 6 plays, and I'll just show them to you right here. And this is how the book is structured along these 6 plays. Obey the clock, coerce, comply, continue, prove, and conform. And the idea is, in an industrial age hierarchy, which looks like this, it always looks the same. Thinker at the top, doers below them. Since the whole organization is tuned to obey the clock, the job of the leaders is to get somebody else to do something that they didn't decide to do. And that's fundamentally coercion. We use power, position, influence, threats, whatever, to get someone else to do something that we chose for them to do. Now, coercion is not the word we typically use. It's a kind of an ugly word. So we say, well, we motivate or we inspire, but fundamentally it's about getting someone else to do something that they didn't choose to do. And then the output of coercion is compliance. They go, well, I guess so, we'll go along. And then continue. You want to run the production line as long as possible. I use the story of Henry Ford starting producing the Model T back in 1908. In 1920, he was still producing the same, fundamentally the same car. Hadn't changed. In the meantime, GM had come along and done a bunch of different models. And so think about that. You could have worked for Ford's factory for 15 years as a tool and die maker and made the same tools supporting the same assembly line. But the whole idea is to continue in these long runs. And then we have the sense that we got to prove and perform. It's about doing. And because of this whole structure, because we know we're going to have to get somebody else to do what we want them to do. I just glanced at the comments, and yeah, it's a submarine, the Santa Fe. Yes, no, that's actually, yeah, that's the Santa Fe. Sorry, I have a couple of submarines. You think I know my own submarine? Anyway, don't stay on target. See, I need to be in a doing mode here. So then we need to, we hide behind our hierarchical position. So I'm talking about the conform play. So we have these 6 plays, and we think that in a modern organization, what you want is the new playbook. And the new playbook looks like this. Instead of obeying the clock, we control the clock. Instead of coercion, we collaborate. Instead of compliance was the outcome of coercion, we commit, which comes from inside, and that's the result of collaboration. Then we have a learn and improve mindset, and then we connect as human beings. In the industrial age, I didn't need to create psychological safety because I wasn't asking anybody what they thought. I didn't need to know what they didn't need to feel safe. The doing work is very tolerant of stress, but thinking work is very, very sensitive, and a little bit of stress shuts down our brains, and then we don't get the best ideas. So it's only now when we want people to think and say what they share the ideas or say, yeah, I might be a problem here, I'm not sure, those kind of words, that we need to create an environment of psychological safety. And the way to do that is through connecting as human beings. So what we think the better pattern now is, instead of having one group do the thinking and another group doing the doing, everybody has to periodically think. Now, you can't just be thinking all the time, because then nothing ever gets happened. You don't get the work done. The plane never takes off. The operation never happens. The nuclear power plant never gets started. So we think work looks more like this now. Think, this is decision. Should we start the nuclear power plant? Are we ready for the operation? Then we do it, and we follow the procedures, and we're very focused. And then we exit at the end, and we reflect back. So it's think, do, think. And then there's a series of these think, do, think, think, do, think, think, do, think. And that's called learning. Learning happens when we have an idea, the thinking part, but then we actually engage in the real world to see what happens, and then we reflect upon it. If organizations don't have a language to describe we're in thinking mode, embrace variability mode, and then we're in doing mode, reduce variability mode, then it kind of looks like this. We're sort of expansive and we're sort of focused. But the language that we use is naturally exclusive. And we can work hard to bring diverse people of diverse backgrounds into the organization, but then we put them in a meeting and we run it in a way which makes it harder for those outliers to express what they're probably thinking. When you have the right language, you can be very broadly expansive when it comes to the thinking part, and then very focused when it comes to the doing part. This was the irony of the Santa Fe, was we were really good at tapping everybody's ideas when we were making a decision. But at the same time, the inspectors would say, but you're also better than any other ship we've seen at focusing and following the procedure. Now, trust me, once the decision is made to start the nuclear reactor, you don't want a lot of creativity. You want following the procedure. If for some reason the procedure can't be followed, then we control the clock by saying time out. We exit doing mode, we go to thinking mode, we gather around while the clock is stopped. That relieves pressure, allows our prefrontal cortex to be fully engaged. Then we make a decision and go back into doing mode. This is what the andon cord in the Toyota production system is so effective at. Now the andon cord, it's the Japanese word for lantern. And what it is, it used to be a cord, but now it's a button that the worker on the assembly line pushes to indicate he or she's having a problem assembling the vehicle. And because normally they're on an assembly line, so it's keep the line moving, keep the line moving, keep the line moving. But what Toyota did was, we need to give the workers a signal to say, I need to shift from doing mode to deciding mode. And it will pause the line, and then the supervisor comes over. You know what the supervisor says first thing out of the supervisor's mouth? Thank you. Not really, you again. Thank you, and I'm sorry that you're having a problem getting the fender on. Let's fix it. Thinking mode. Then when they're done, back to doing mode. The third framework, so we've talked about red work, blue work, deciding and doing, and we've said, hey, in the old days it was two different people. Now it's all the same people using time to flip back and forth. Number two, it's a playbook of 6 plays that we had inherited from the industrial age. Now there's 6 new plays. And number 3 is what I'm calling the team language coefficient. The team language coefficient, and we got this idea from a couple of different places, but there's a remarkable transcript of 25 hours from a tragic event where a ship, the El Faro, in 2015 sailed out of Jacksonville, Florida, heading for San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was at the end of September, hurricane season. There was a hurricane. They knew it. They had all the modern navigation equipment, weather equipment. They sailed into the hurricane. The ship sank. All 33 people's lives were lost. All the bodies were lost. But the NTSB was able to recover the black box. And just like on an airplane, these ships have black boxes and they record the conversations on the bridge of the ship. So we have 25 hours of conversation where we can eavesdrop on the team and listen to the words that they said as they were trying to make decisions about keep going or divert, because there were two chances, two opportunities really to divert through the Bahamas and get to the safe side. And why don't they do it? And it follows that playbook that I talked about. But the other thing that was very interesting is if you just count the words, a very interesting pattern emerges. In every case where the captain was on the bridge, and I counted the words of the captain, the officer, and the crew member. And I said, I'm not going to tell you anything about the words, what the words were, how they were said, just the number of words, guess who's who. And you guessed in hierarchical order, you would be 100% correct. In every situation, the captain said the most number of words, followed by the officer, typically closely followed by the officer. So it's like 55%, 40%, and then maybe 5%. Then there was a big drop off to the crew member. In one case, and almost an hour passed, then the crew member said 3 words, 2, 4, 5. He was answering a question, what course were they on? And then another 45 minutes passed, and then with him saying nothing, and then the captain left the bridge. There are 2 critical points where crew members, one is one of the male officers and then one of the female officers, call the captain, and they're trying to get permission, I guess is the best way to say it, to divert to the safe side of the Bahamas. They're on the Atlantic side. They want to divert around so that the Bahamas is between them and the storm. And ultimately, the language is it's deferential, it's vague, it's ambiguous, and it's ineffective because they don't turn. And it's sort of, it eats you up as you read it because you know these people are fighting for their lives, but they don't have the tools. The problem isn't evil people. The problem is good people trying to do the right thing, but they just didn't have the right playbook. And that's what we're trying to solve. So it's a window into the playbook, but at the same time, this idea of how many words are we saying? So for example, in a meeting, you could count the number of words. And if one person is saying way fewer words, we invite that person to share. And if one person is saying too many words, we can invite that person to be quiet. Because the hypothesis, and there's some science behind this done up at MIT, the hypothesis is that teams where there's a more even share of voice are more resilient, agile, and they're safe. It feels safer to share ideas. So this idea of team language coefficient, you can mathematically model it, or you can mathematically come up with a formula. We piggybacked on a concept called the Gini coefficient, which is how you measure income inequality, but this is simply word inequality or share of voice inequality. And it's a number between 0 and 1. You can kind of see better teams have less divergence from an even share of voice. So that's basically the story. And I think the hard part for me with the book wasn't so much collecting a bunch of don't say this, say that. It was what is this hidden structure of how these things are all working? How do you group them? And what can we contribute in terms of revealing this hidden structure? Because once you understand the structure, you may forget some specific tip, but you probably won't forget the structure. And so now we've been applying this in a more rigorous way and playing with it. And it seems like it works. The final thing is this idea of reflection, broad reflection, focused doing, and broad reflection plays out at all kind of different levels. It may play out 3 or 4 times during an hour if you're on some sort of a task. It may play out 3 or 4 times during a week. It may play out 3 or 4 times during a year at bigger and bigger levels, but it also plays out during our life. And the structure of the education system in society now is essentially one of blue, like, hey, go get an education. And then when you're 20 something, go do for the rest of your life. And these words of continuous education and lifelong learning are starting to come into the vocabulary, but fundamentally, our lives are not set up to have broad reflection periods. Now, Bill Gates, when he was running Microsoft, would disappear for a week with these think weeks twice a year. And I think this was, this is sort of exactly what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about these different reflection periods during our life. So that's one. And then maybe we go on sabbatical, we do a renewal, we go to grad school, whatever it is, we pause, reflect, what are we doing? Because as we go through life, our perspectives change and our desires change and what we're trying to achieve with our life changes. And I think if we don't take time out and think about that, we just sort of end up doing what we do when we get to wherever we get as a result of a bunch of small decisions unguided by a deliberate path. So that concludes my prepared statements. And now I'm going to see, go ahead and chime in if you've got stories or comments or questions, and I'll just pick the ones that I like the best. Yeah, so Byron Ernest is on the call with us. Byron was Teacher of the Year in Indiana, and so he got punished by being the named principal of a school, Emmer Manual, which had been failing for 7 years in a row, and did an amazing job turning it around. Kids weren't graduating, kids weren't going to college, turned that all around. And his question is, unfortunately, this industrial age thinking crept into the classroom. And one of the fun parts of one of my keynotes is I show this, I showed you the picture, but this industrial age, where'd it go? This picture right here. You see all these people sitting in rows, and I have a picture of a classroom that looks exactly the same. And then yesterday I was at a CEO conference, and they were sitting exactly in these same rows, which I thought was particularly ironic. But because the story was we had 12 years, because some humans weren't good at what we were asking them to do. We needed the brainwashing program to beat the creativity out of them and get them to conform and comply. And we called that the education program. And there's still reverberations from that now. I see Irene. Hi, Irene, out there in California. So Irene runs one of the large Kaiser Permanente facilities out in California. And the questions about making it safe. There's a story that I retell in the book where Dr. Damasio does a surgery on a patient, and the patient's got a brain tumor, and they remove the brain tumor, and it's successful. But the patient afterwards exhibited two behaviors. Number one, he was emotionally flat. He could describe his life before and after the surgery. And even though his life took a downward turn after the surgery, not because of the surgery, but because of the impact later, you would have thought he would sort of be angry or sad or something, but there was no emotion, because the lesion affected the emotional parts of the brain. He also was totally incapable of making decisions. And this is why his life started falling apart. Where we make decisions in the brain physically is connected to emotions. All decisions at the end of the day are driven by emotion. If we don't care about our people making decisions, they don't need to have any emotion at work. And so this whole idea of the sterile workplace where everything sounds professional and we hide behind masks, that's all comes from this, because we don't care about people thinking. You don't need to say, well, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure there's the right diagnosis here. How sure are you? I'm only 20% sure, but if I'm wrong, person dies. So it's worth speaking up. But people don't need to speak up. They are always faced. You will never know when they don't speak up. And what they're doing is trading a short-term potential cost for them. Because if they speak up and they're, quote, wrong, which again, that's not the correct word to use, because it turns out that the diagnosis is correct, then we treat them in some certain way. But if versus an uncertain gain for others, for the people involved, for the organization. So it's a certain immediate cost to me versus an uncertain potential benefit for others. And in the wrong environment, your brain is always going to go with safe for me. Stress, if it's a stressful environment, it's going to trigger your reptile instincts and it's going to go safe for me. So it's only now when we want people to think, when we want them to invite what they see and share their idea. Hey, I got a good idea for how to make things more efficient. And I'm not going to say it because whatever. This is what requires the safe workplace, which requires us to connect as human beings. I have to be careful when I talk about this because I don't want people to get the impression, oh, I can just run around making gut feel decisions all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. Alejandro, good to see. Alejandro runs a program for Vern. By the way, I saw Vern yesterday. It was awesome. How do you deal with think, do during uncertainty? Look, everything is uncertain if it has to do with the future. And so the idea is we can think about it. This is the key decision for the leader to make. It's not what do we do, but how long do we spend pondering what to do before we start trying it. And we see organizations that are dysfunctional on both sides. Some of them, we ponder too long. You hear words like analysis paralysis and those kind of things. It's because we're pondering too long, because we're making the transition to doing too difficult. You want to make the transition from doing, hey, time out, let's shift to thinking, easy with the end on chord. But at the same time, you got to make the transition from thinking into doing, let's make a commitment, also easy. And one of the ways you do it is you bound the commitment by saying, okay, well, let's just try it for 3 months. Let's not call it an initiative that for the end of time, this is what we're going to do, but just, hey, for the next 3 months, let's try this, take some data, learning perspective, and then we'll reflect on the end how it is, and we'll either drop it, tweak it, or keep doing it. So, but that's the key decision the leaders need to make is structuring. How long are we going to spend in thinking before we go to doing? How long are we going to spend in doing before we go to the thing? Now, my hunch on this belief, we tried to find some science on this, and we didn't find any science on what this phasing ought to be. But my hunch is at the beginning of a project, you want more thinking and less doing because there's more uncertainty in the project. So you just try something for maybe 2 weeks, and then you have these big steps up and small steps across. And then later in the project, as the variables become more defined and your options are narrowed, then the thinking, the decision space is smaller, and you can do longer and longer run, and then you get it done, and then the project's done. But it's kind of this ramp that looks like that. All right, I'm going to sign off. And oh, Alejandro, you're at Nutrients, sorry. I got confused. Yeah, no, hey, you're out there and beautiful in the West where the mountains are. I'm so jealous. But I'm going to sign off. Thanks so much. What we're going to do is I'm engaging in a series of keynotes, and we are including 500 books for your team with the keynote. And what we're hoping to do is jumpstart, help you with jumpstarting this change in your organizations, as well as helping us jumpstart our book sales as we go into our launch in February.